All right. Hello, everybody. I want to continue on with this is the part one ecology basics. So these were the notes that we started on Monday. So we were talking about reproductive strategies. So before that, we were talking about endothermic versus ectothermic. So how we generate thermal energy, which is heat energy. So endotherms are going to use internal metabolic processes to generate and maintain heat. So like us with our internal body temperature. Ectotherms, however, they cannot generate heat through those processes, so they need to basically go out and obtain their heat from an outside source, so like reptiles bathing in the sun. So this is looking at reproductive strategies. I'm going to play this video because this gives a really good explanation of the different reproductive strategies we're going to look at. So basically what we're going to...
It is a bizarre practice, but the female praying mantis sometimes eats her mate. The unusual meal provides nutrients for her eggs. A school of clownfish consists of a male and female breeding pair, along with a larger group of non-breeding males. If the female dies, the breeding male will switch its gender. For most organisms, mating is the reproductive act that enables individuals to pass on their genes. Let's learn more about reproductive strategy. Reproductive strategy refers to the ways in which a species ensures its offspring reach adulthood. The reproductive strategy evolves to maximize the number of offspring that reach maturity and reproduce. The animal world engages in various reproductive strategies. For example, zebras have a gestation period of about a year and produce a single foal that can live up to 40 years, while female sea turtles emerge from the ocean and lay 50 to 200 eggs. They cover the hole and retreat to the ocean, hoping that at least one of their eggs survives to adulthood. There are two basic strategies. Parents can invest in a few offspring with long development to maturity, as in the zebra. Alternatively, parents can opt to produce many offspring with shorter time to maturity, as in the sea turtle. Each strategy and how it has evolved in each species is the result of a trade-off between number of offspring and development time. Scientists recognize the two reproductive strategies as R selection and K selection. Each species lies somewhere on the RK continuum, determined by evolution, which maximizes the reproductive success of a species' individuals. What kinds of environmental conditions make one strategy more successful than another? Stable, resource-rich environments with young exposed to predators produce K strategies of reproduction. K strategies invest in development of offspring. Animals such as humans, elephants, dolphins, and plants like sequoia trees use a K reproductive strategy. A species' reproductive strategy affects its reproductive behavior and physical characteristics. For example, K strategists often choose mates through competitive mating rituals. They form pair bonds and create small families with few offspring. Pair bonding in small families enable the parents to care for offspring during a long developmental period, resulting in low juvenile mortality. Among K strategists, body size is typically large, and reproductive maturity takes many years. The population of K species is stable. Humans are a prime example of a K species. We live in a stable environment, invest in long-term development, and care for just a few offspring. On the other end of the continuum, unstable environments with few resources and less predatory threat favor R selection reproductive strategies. Small rodents, most insects, bacteria, and weeds are examples of R species. Species within these groups have a lot of offspring and reach maturity quickly, often living short lives. Few R-selected species engage in any sort of mate competition or mating rituals. Juvenile mortality is very high. The few individuals that reproduce do so only once or a few times, but they produce a large number of offspring. Among R-selected species, parental care of offspring is usually absent. Offspring are capable of survival at birth and reach reproductive maturity quickly. The population size of R-selected species often fluctuates widely. Evolution always acts to maximize the reproductive success of individuals. A particular reproductive strategy characterizes a species only because evolution is acted through natural selection to ensure each individual has the best chance possible of having offspring that will, in their turn, continue the next generation.
Okay. So I want to go over R and K selected species. That's kind of what you were supposed to get from this video. This is more of a spectrum versus you're either R or K selected. But we do kind of talk about species that are more on the R end of the spectrum and species that are more on the K end of the spectrum. This table is a really, really great sort of lays out exactly what the differences are. Um, so this is determined by environmental selection pressures. So the way a species mates and reproduces is completely based off of natural selection, whatever is going to work best for that species based on the environment. So we know that our selected species, they're living in unstable and unpredictable environments. So these are something like a fish or sea turtles. So they don't necessarily have a lot of predation going on, but their environment's very unpredictable. So they will have mass amounts of offspring and hope that one or some survive and are able to go on and reproduce. So this has a very high juvenile mortality rate. Um, but because they're having so many young, the chances of at least one surviving are pretty high. Also, the one that survives technically should have the best fitness because it was able to survive in this unstable, unpredictable environment, which means it's the best one to pass on its genes. K selected species, on the other hand, they're in more stable, predictable environments. There's more predation occurring. They're going to produce a lot fewer offspring. So, something like us, we only produce one offspring that takes 9 months, and we invest a ton of time and energy into helping that species offspring survive and reproduce later in life. So again, there are species that fall in between these two sort of K and R strategies. Something is kind of like a cat. They have 6 offspring. So it's not necessarily a K strategy, but it's really not an R strategy either. So kind of falls within the middle of that spectrum. So often there's an energy trade off between growth, reproduction, survival. Obviously, you need to put the energy to where it needs to go. So the compromises that a species makes is considered their life history strategy and encompasses a ton of different options. Um, so if a parent has to invest a lot of time and energy into caring for a young, then it's necessary to keep, everything else energy low. So the life history strategy of a particular species, it's again determined by natural selection. The individuals with the ability to most effectively distribute limited energy resources between growth, reproduction, and survival will be more successful at passing those traits to the next generation. So it's all about fitness. Who is able to basically use and distribute their energy more efficiently, that they are able to survive and make viable offspring. So we're going to kind of move forward now that we're talking about energy to metabolic rate. So there is a relationship between the metabolic rate and body mass. So the size of an organism um, kind of determines metabolic rate. So there is a relationship between the two. So if we look at this graph, and this seems kind of counterintuitive, but smaller organisms actually have a higher metabolic rate. So if you look at little teeny like mice, they're usually breathing very, very quickly. That's because they have a very high metabolic rate. They need a lot of oxygen. They have a very high um, kind of heart rate and um, breathing rate. Whereas as we go down and we get bigger and bigger and bigger species, like an elephant, their metabolic rate is very, very, very low. This is also another reason, they're able to maintain that energy to build such a massive organism. So the net gain in energy results in energy storage or the growth of an organism. Loss of energy results in loss of mass and ultimately the death of an organism. So we obviously need energy in order to survive. So what metabolic rate is this is the speed at which food and nutrients are catabolized or basically broken down to meet those cellular energy needs. So there's a ton of factors that are going to influence this environment, as always, the activity level of an organism. Is there any biological constraints? So environment plays a massive role on every single species. So while there is again a similar trend between metabolic rate and then kind of the standard, so we can see a difference between our endo and ectotherms, um, we really can't compare the two in terms of metabolic rate because again they are such different processes. More active organisms are going to have a higher metabolic rate, which makes sense. So, something like a tiny little shrew is going to have a very high metabolic rate. Something like an elephant is not. All right. So this is our energy pyramid. You guys are pretty familiar with this. You did an activity. This is basically putting species into their um, correct trophic level, which shows the amount of energy. So the reason it is shaped as a pyramid is at the bottom we have the most amount of energy available. We know that as we move up, only 10% is going to move up per level. So that's why when we get to the very top, they're going to have the least amount of energy available to them. This is also what causes populations to stay kind of at a certain what we call carrying capacity, or they can only have so many of themselves because there's only so much energy to go around. So when we get up to our massive quaternary consumers or tertiary, their populations are going to be a lot smaller than our secondary primary consumers. So changes in energy availability, this can make huge disruptions to ecosystems. So if we're changing any of the energy resources, like if sunlight was affected for some reason, so if sunlight was affected, which is what our producers use to grow and reproduce, maintain themselves, that would have a complete bottom up effect. It would affect every single consumer all the way up to the top. This can also happen at other levels. If we had our quaternary consumers completely taken off of this pyramid, we'd see a massive growth in our tertiary consumers, which would then cause our other consumers to go up or down in population size. So ecosystems are very, very, very delicate and balanced in this matter. So energy availability. This is changes to the composition of an organism. So this can be plants or animals, and will cause an alteration in the amount of energy available. So, like I was saying, if we're reducing or increasing the amount of energy available, so sunlight, water, that can alter plant populations, which this is the foundation for all food webs in most ecosystems. So we can see really drastic effects if we're having um, that main energy source, any sort of sunlight or water issues. This is a great example, and I'm sure you maybe remember this from bio. This is looking at wolves of Yellowstone. So when there were wolves previously in Yellowstone, and humans had gone through and basically hunted them to get rid of them. They thought they were causing issues, safety reasons, whatever. As we can see, when wolves were present, there was massive biodiversity. A lot of different species were present, greenery. It looks very diverse, and there are a good mix of different species. When wolves were taken away, a lot of the herbivores overtook this environment and then depleted the plant population because that's what they eat. So once they deplete the plant population, then that's causing again those bottom up effects where we start to see the disappearance of other species because they can't survive in this environment anymore. So really there are specific species that actually can help hold ecosystems in place, and they're what we call keystone species. So wolves, when they were taken out of Yellowstone, they found very, very quickly that they were a keystone species. If we take them out, they can cause what's called a trophic cascade. So that top carnivore is taken out and it has those top down effects. Okay, I kind of want to revisit what autotroph and heterotroph mean, just because those are terms you will see throughout the ecology unit. Autotrophs, they capture and use energy. So these are going to be your plants, photosynthetic organisms. One thing I do want to point out is this also includes chemosynthetic organisms. So they can actually capture energy from small inorganic molecules in the absence of oxygen. So photosynthetic captures sunlight energy. Chemosynthetic use inorganic molecules. So they are different, but they're both autotrophs. They are making their own food. So this is what I just talked about. We learned a lot about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. The big thing with autotrophs is, again, just understanding they are making their own food either through sunlight and organic molecules or inorganic molecules. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, so they're going to metabolize our main macromolecule. They have to consume in order to get the energy required for metabolic processes. So they have to consume some other living being, whether that is a plant, so our herbivores, or if they are omnivores, they consume plant and animals, or carnivores, where they'll be consuming meat products or other animals. This one I'm not going to play for you. If you feel like you need to relook at it, please do so. We did our activity. If you feel like you are having trouble with food chains and food webs and how to build and make them, please watch this video. So this is just a practice. If this is something that you would like to do, just pause this video. You'll go through, create a food web first. I give you feeding relationships. This is obviously extremely simple. So you'll first create a food web, then you will create an energy pyramid with these same species and calculate the energy available if the producer level has 500,000 kcals available. So if you pause it and want to go through, this shows you the answers. So this is what your food web should look like. Obviously, you can have the actual written. I put pictures. And this is what your energy pyramid should look like along with our calculated energy available. All right, next we're going to talk about disruptions in ecosystems. So we know that changing environments can lead to the change in the genetic makeup of a population over time. If the environment's changing, fitness and what is an adaptation for that environment is going to change. So we know that an adaptation is a genetic variation that's favored by a selection, and it's manifested or shown as a trait that provides an advantage to an organism in a particular environment. So what's an adaptation in one environment can change drastically if the environment changes in any way, shape, or form. We know mutations are random and are not directed by specific environmental pressures. So any mutations that occur that give some sort of adaptation, it is completely random and due to chance. And if it happens to work in a specific environment under those environmental pressures, it is considered an adaptation and it is giving that species good fitness. Right, I'm going to play this really quickly.
Long ago in England, there lived a peppered moth. Most peppered moths were white with black spots, but some...
So this is going to show what I mean by adaptations and how environmental changes really determine what is going to be selected for or against in certain environments. We already talked about peppered moths a little bit, but again, this is one of the best examples of showing this selection and environmental changes.
Some were black with white spots. Peppered moths like to rest on the trunks of birch trees, which have light-colored bark. The white peppered moths would blend in perfectly against this bark, but the black peppered moths could easily be seen, and so they would get eaten by birds. The white peppered moths were better adapted, and so they could survive to produce more offspring. Then came the Industrial Revolution, where factories burned coal and created dark clouds of pollution called soot that turned the white birch bark dark. By 1900, the population of peppered moths had changed. Now it seemed that the black peppered moths were better suited for the environment, and the white peppered moths could easily be picked off by birds. Black peppered moths reproduced very successfully, and white peppered moths disappeared from the population. Once factories realized the environmental damage they were causing, they cleaned up their act, and birch bark became white again. By the year 2000, the population of peppered moths had returned to nearly all white with black spots. This has been the true story of natural selection, the process by which organisms better suited for their environment tend to survive and produce more offspring. Thanks for watching.
So again, really amazing
Long ago
example
in
of even just what a few years of environmental changes can do for a population over time. So we know advantageous traits. This is some sort of trait that is an advantage in a particular environment. But again, this can very quickly become neutral or even a disadvantage if that environment changes, just like the peppered moths. An organism cannot decide it wants a specific trait based on these new selection pressures. So the white peppered moths couldn't decide, ooh, I need to start getting darker wings and become a black peppered moth because look at these trees. They're all dark. I'm getting eaten. It's all based off of chance. Right. So again, a lot of words. You don't need to write any of this. This is just so the intentional or unintentional introduction of an invasive species. This basically can allow species to exploit a new niche that's free of predators or competitors, and they can outcompete organisms for resources. So this is an invasive plant species that's native to China and Japan. And it's basically, there's several consumers of the vine that help it manage its growth. However, it's able to outcompete native species in the US and has no natural consumer. So if this makes its way into the US, it doesn't have any natural predators. Whereas in China and Japan, where it's originally from, there are several consumers that help keep this invasive species at bay. That is why when you go to other countries or sometimes even other states like Hawaii, they have very, very strict food, drink, are you bringing any sort of invasive species into our ecological environment? Because this makes massive differences. So a disruption of plant species, you can have disruption of animal species. And that's it. So this is it for Ecology Basics. Again, if you need to go through this PowerPoint at any time, please feel free to do so. Also, remember Khan Academy and Bozeman Science. I have those linked in the resource folder for you. Those are always great things to look at as well.